Welcome to Service Before Self, a podcast that tackles the evolving needs of veterans and their families. Dedicated to the idea that every veteran and their family can succeed in the community where they live. This podcast will introduce you to people and programs that are having an impact today. They will share their successes and lessons learned in creating successful programs that ensure veterans and their families reach their full potential.
From 1961 to 1971, during the Vietnam War, the U.S. sprayed millions of gallons of herbicides over the countryside of South Vietnam. Several types of herbicides were used, and they came to be known by the color of an identifying stripe around the 55-gallon drum that was used to store them. So while we are most familiar with Agent Orange, there was also Agent Blue, White, Green, Purple, and Agent Pink. Each herbicide had a specific purpose. Some were used for destroying the heavy jungle vegetation that the Viet Cong guerrillas and North Vietnamese army used to conceal their movements. Some were used to destroy crops, denying the enemy a food source. But Agent Orange was the one that was used the most by far and the one that is most associated with the Vietnam War. Agent Orange was also used in places like Laos and Cambodia. What made Agent Orange so effective was a combination of two different herbicides, but a byproduct of combining these two herbicides was the creation of a very toxic form of dioxin, a known carcinogen in humans. The use of Agent Orange was controversial at the time because not only was it used to destroy crops that were being used by the enemy, but it also was used to destroy crops that were used to support local villagers. This controversy was amplified as service members began to return from the war and started reporting increased rates of cancer and nerve, digestive, skin, and respiratory disorders. Veterans began to file claims with the VA for their exposure to Agent Orange in 1977, but by 1993, the VA had compensated only 486 victims, although it had received disability claims from almost 40,000 service members. Throughout the 80s, class action lawsuits and congressional legislation were used to keep the spotlight on the plight of veterans exposed to Agent Orange, but it wasn't until Congress enacted the Agent Orange Act in 1991 that certain conditions were considered presumptive to exposure to Agent Orange and dioxin. And by presumption means that those illness and conditions were presumed to be associated with the service member's service in Vietnam. Once they received that designation of a presumptive condition, veterans were then able to receive treatment and compensation. And importantly, the law also mandated that every 2 years there would be a review to see if there were illnesses and conditions that needed to be added to the list. And that review process that occurs every 2 years occurs all the way up to present day. But the story doesn't end there. Even today, Vietnam veterans continue to fight for treatment and compensation for the illnesses and diseases that sometimes appear years after their exposure. And for example, just this past January, Blue Water Navy veterans were finally granted presumption for service connection based upon their service in Vietnam and their exposure to Agent Orange. This is the legacy of Agent Orange in Vietnam, a war that ended in 1975, and 45 years later, veterans are continuing to fight for what they deserve. Why are we talking about Agent Orange? Well, unfortunately, it looks like history is beginning to repeat itself because we are dealing with another issue that veterans are facing and that many have described as this generation's Agent Orange, and its exposure to burn pits. Many know this, but for those who don't, burn pits are exactly what they sound like. It's an area of a deployed military base or right next to a base where open air combustion of waste takes place. These burn pits were used extensively at many, if not all, of our bases in Iraq and Afghanistan. Anything that is considered waste was burned in these burn pits, and often jet fuel was used as an accelerant. Normal garbage, plastics, electronics, metal, aluminum, human waste, rubber, batteries, and even discarded ammunition found its way into burn pits. And many of those who were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as in other locations around the world, were exposed daily to the toxic smoke that was produced. And not only were they exposed to that very toxic and noxious smoke, they were also exposed to a byproduct that occurred from burning some of these materials in burn pits, and that was dioxin, the same carcinogen that was one of the challenges with exposure to Agent Orange. And while burn pits are not new to Iraq and Afghanistan, what's new is what we know from being exposed to them. And now here to talk more about burn pits and the effects from being exposed to them is Rosie Torres, the executive director of the nonprofit organization Burn Pits 360. Rosie is not only an advocate for veterans and families dealing with burn pit exposure, her and her husband, Captain Roy Torres, U.S. Army, are dealing with the effects of Leroy's exposure to one of the largest burn pits in Iraq when he was deployed to Iraq in 2007 and 2008. Okay, we have Rosie Torres, the executive director of Burn Pits 360, joining us today on the Service Before Self podcast. Rosie, welcome and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Sam. It's an honor to be here.
So, Rosie, I've already given our audience a preview of your work at Burn Pits 360, both not only you, but also your husband, Leroy. If you could share with our audience a little bit more about creating Burn Pits 360 and what brought you to this work.
Sure, Sam. Thank you. So really just from personal experience, being that my husband deployed to Camp Anaconda, Balad, Iraq, where one of the largest burn pits that we now know has been highlighted in the media, 10 acres in size. Coming home and, it's experiencing these horrible, debilitating pulmonary, respiratory symptoms, and was pretty much forced by his employer to not come back until he had a definitive answer, and mainly for the sake of them thinking that he was contagious, right? So from that experience of him beginning that onset of that cough that sometimes he would collapse from as a result of like lack of air and breathing issues. We didn't really have a choice to accept whatever this delay and deny system that we were facing with DoD and VA. So we decided, well, number one, we had no choice but to pursue a definitive answer. And then through that process, realized that after meeting an online community of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who were all facing the same issue, and then hence Burn Pits 360 was formed. After deciding that we just couldn't leave all of these people out to fend for themselves.
Unfortunately, that sounds so much similar to the same thing that Vietnam veterans were facing when they came back from Vietnam and started seeing these increased rates of cancers and other illnesses and conditions and diseases, and just not being recognized by the VA at the time. I mean, one of the statistics from that particular period of time is that 1977 is when Vietnam veterans started filing claims for treatment and for compensation. And by 1993, of almost 40,000 claims that had been filed, only 400 had been approved by the VA. And so it sounds like you and Leroy encountered the same type of frustration once he returned from Iraq and started, like you said, started with a cough, and then it started leading to some other issues and challenges as well.
Right. And, just to clarify his symptoms, he became symptomatic. Like, I know we talk a lot about, and we can talk later about the latency period of some of these symptoms, but his began immediately while in theater, while on active duty in Iraq. And I recall him being quarantined because of those symptoms. And so, yes, I worked at the VA at the time that we were going through that whole delay and deny process. And that made it even much more frustrating on a personal level and really as an employee, right, is trying to figure out, like, if we were being treated this way and I had this, high level knowledge of the bureaucracy and the benefits and compensation system process and the healthcare system process, just having that upper hand and realizing that if I, with this knowledge and experience, were facing this horrific system of being told absolutely not, there's just no way with the clear conscience that we could just look the other way and say, like I mentioned earlier, everyone fend for themselves and figure out what we had to. There's just no way we could look away and allow that to happen. No way.
What are some of the challenges as you and Leroy have tried to navigate this process? What are some of the challenges you guys have faced? And not only just talking about the VA, but, Leroy has faced challenges with his employer once he returned from Iraq as well. Can you share some of those challenges you guys have faced trying to navigate this?
Sure. This sort of, really brings me to the point of like why today, a decade later, we are, with the hopes that this legislation gets passed regarding presumption. So, I know a lot of times, we put our focus on the healthcare, and yes, healthcare is and remains one of the biggest challenges, right? That access to specialized healthcare. For Leroy, I mean, as his wife, just having a witness, not just myself, but my children in the room, witnessing him being told that this is more a somatoform disease and that no further exams or assessments were needed regarding his pulmonary issues. And, watching him having to, just accept that kind of answer was really horrible, right? It was sad and just tragic for many, I'm sure. But aside from like that lack of specialized healthcare, in regards to toxic exposure, the lack of, being granted a disability compensation for an illness that ended his career, because there's no code in the Code of Federal Regulations for constrictive bronchiolitis. I mean, a whole array of things, right? And then that leads to this whole issue that we've had lately in the veteran community about how do we end suicide? How do we stop homelessness? Well, I feel like it goes back to that whole issue of let's stop treating, like John Stewart said in many interviews, let's stop treating these veterans as if they're defendants, right? Having to be their own scientists, having to be their own lawyers, having to be their own, VA adjudicators, prepping their documents. So leading up to the whole denial of acknowledgement of that association between exposures and his health, being denied, all of those things, aside from compensation, is the whole issue of, then losing all you've worked for. A lot of these, agencies feel like most veterans want a handout. No one wants a handout. Like Leroy graduated with his master's degree, went to the state police academy, worked his butt off, then was a commander of a unit. Like he did the whole thing. He did all of that for a reason. And it wasn't to go beg the VA to give him 100%, right? So in the process of being told no, then we as a couple had to figure out how do we survive until the VA decides that there is a connection, until you find that loophole of how do I prove this lung disease is connected to exposure. In the process, we faced foreclosure letters, repossession letters. He was forced to resign from his job, to pretty much fired. What happened was they wouldn't accommodate him into a new position, into a non-commissioned job. They initially told him, you can't come back. You have a lung disease. We can't have you on the highway. And then they took that letter back and then realized, like, well, how do we handle this issue? How do we handle this war injury that none of us understand? And so, he was at the point like, well, we're going to lose our home. So how do I keep from doing that? How do I, prevent from us going into this homelessness issue? And he asked time and time again, accommodate me. I'm willing to accept a non-commissioned position. I have education. I have experience. And there was silence. So fast forward to today, his case is pending to be heard, hopefully, at the Supreme Court of the United States. And if not, then he'll just become one of those other veterans that lost their career due to a war injury that they were discriminated on. It's horrible. I don't wish that on anyone. It's the most horrific thing to have to go through, to be stripped of not just your dignity, but your income, your career, your job. Like, we had a life before this, period.
Rosie, your experience and Leroy's experience, boy, that is incredibly frustrating. And, one of the things I also find frustrating that even today, if you go and look at the VA website, there's a statement on there that says, and I'm quoting, this is directly from their website, at this time, research does not show evidence of long-term health problems from exposure to burn pits. VA continues to study the health of deployed veterans. And I find that statement so frustrating just because that's not exactly true or accurate, because there is evidence that exposure to burn pits is leading to respiratory diseases and has led to cancers. Anything you'd like to talk about that?
So you talk about the statement it says about there's no science, right?
Right.
Okay, right. So I think that it's one of the biggest weapons that the VA will continue to use, and DoD, against this, very vulnerable population of individuals. The science, I don't think we'll ever have the science. I mean, I don't think we'll ever have the science that they're looking for or that they would like to see. We do have science. We have the science that Dr. Miller did. We have the science that Dr. Zema did, and then several other studies that have been done also in the 9/11 community, and then just in general, like regarding exposures. And I know that because I have seen some of the decision rating for disability, toxic exposure related disability ratings that were later granted after legal counsel was included, right? So some of these studies that have been referenced and some of these compensation claims that have been won, if you look at and study those, those studies that are referenced in those that have been in favor of the family of the survivors or the veteran, it just proves that, I mean, if 2,000 disability claims were granted, it's obvious that there is science. And they did use something to grant those disability claims. I'm more interested in seeing the survivor death claims, disability claims, because those are the ones that are going to really show you that pattern of like, let's look at the fact that this was non-genetic. Let's look at this science that was used to win this claim and so forth. But, I feel like VA and DoD will always disregard Dr. Miller's work and Dr. Zema's work. Dr. Coughlin, he was the head of epidemiology at the VA. And he even spoke up and testified against them before Congress that when there is research that's being done, they're told to not release it or destroy it. I doubt he was lying, So yeah, in regards to the science, I think it's what they'll always use. But I feel like it's just a cop-out way of them saying they don't want to have to grant presumption.
Yeah, and for the audience, I just want to kind of share some of my own personal experience, because I think it kind of shows just the scale of the problem here. Is that when we talk about burn pits, and burn pits were not just in Iraq and Afghanistan. Really, any location where we deploy troops overseas, especially when they're going to an area in a very austere location that does not have facilities, you're going to create burn pits in order to get rid of your waste and garbage. So in Iraq and Afghanistan, almost every base, every outpost had a burn pit, and service members, soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors were exposed to those burn pits. In many cases, those burn pits were actually part of the base itself within the perimeter. In some cases, if they were outside the perimeter, they were right next to the base. So where soldiers or service members, where they were living, working, sleeping, eating every single day, they're being exposed to burn pits. And I can tell you from my own personal experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, we put everything in those burn pits. So plastics, metals, aluminum, rubber, human waste. In some cases, even ammunition would find its way into the burn pits. Everything was destroyed in those burn pits. So I know my own personal experience, just the smoke that was produced by these pits and it drifting back across the base camp. Even the smoke itself, you could tell it just wasn't right. It wasn't normal. And I'm sure Leroy experienced the same thing when he was at where Leroy was at. It was actually, if not the largest, one of the largest burn pits, I think, that was run either in Iraq or Afghanistan. So I'm sure he experienced the same thing every day.
Right. Yes, absolutely. And, I just feel like if you can burn a tire here in the United States, because we know that, inhaling that smoke is toxic, do we really need science to tell us the common sense question of breathing JP8 and computers and plastics and all of those things? Are those really associated with all of these illnesses and deaths? Of course it is. I mean, it's just the EPA says you shouldn't burn or you shouldn't inhale JP8. So I think for the VA, like, they're always going to use that excuse of, what dioxin caused what. But what they really should be paying attention to is what are the effects of combustion burning. And it's very similar to what happened during 9/11.
And I think what's important is that, as veterans began to file claims as they came back from Vietnam after exposure to Agent Orange, the burden was always on the veteran to prove that he or she, first of all, they had to prove they had been exposed to Agent Orange in the first place. And then they had to prove, the veteran is having to prove that there is a link between whatever illness or condition they had with exposure to Agent Orange. And, we see the same, kind of the same script being followed with burn pits. First of all, veterans have to prove they were exposed to burn pits. But as I just explained, burn pits were everywhere. So if you were in Iraq or Afghanistan, you were exposed to burn pits at one point, if not daily. And then, as you have already articulated, the burden is on the veteran and their family to prove that there's a link between, their condition or their illness with exposure to burn pits. And because they were unregulated and everything was burned in them, that, like you said, it's impossible. So the burden should not be on the veteran and the family. The burden should be on the VA. I think that's the only thing that's right.
Right. And not have to, answer that question of scientific evidence. Like, we know there's a link between diseases and toxins. It's been proven in the past. So, right. Not put it back on the veteran. And time is an issue too. I mean, there are veterans who have already passed away from their exposure to burn pits and are dealing with the illnesses right now today. So, I just think this idea of chasing, as you said earlier, kind of chasing the science, all that's going to happen is more people are going to continue, more veterans and families will continue to suffer. And we just don't have the time for that.
Yeah, that's just tough. I just wanted to switch gears here a little bit, and you mentioned earlier some of the work that you've been doing with John Stewart, who was so instrumental in supporting first responders who were suffering diseases and illnesses following their work following 9/11. Can you talk more about the work that you're doing with John Stewart and with John Phil and Senator Gillibrand and Congressman Ruiz?
Sure, right. So for a year, we've been meeting in Washington to discuss how we could really help this population of warfighters and their survivors. And, initially I reached out to John Phil from the Feel Good Foundation. He said, absolutely, we're on board. And, as you saw in the press conference regarding the HR 8261, Senate Bill 4572, the Warfighters Toxins Act, that's a result of all of those meetings that have been taking place for a whole year, is creating these allies and coalition of not just veterans organizations, but these veteran entrepreneurs, public figures, first responder unions. A lot of those individuals have been affected. And so really, we've been working towards this day for a whole year, if not maybe more, to make sure that there would be a bill that would establish a service connection for veterans affected by toxic exposure.
And for our audience, one of the things that we'll do is we will post, if you have not seen it, we will post a link to that press conference that Rosie mentioned, that where Senator Gillibrand and Congressman Ruiz presented the bill that's, hopefully it passes and will force the VA to grant presumption of service connection for these illnesses associated with exposure to burn pits. But we'll put a link in our show notes. So if anyone wants to go back and take a look at that press conference or some of the excerpts, John Stewart made some great points during the press conference. So we encourage everyone to listen to that. In terms of that legislation, kind of what are the next steps? Or maybe a better question is, how can our audience help in moving that legislation along?
Sure, right. Thank you, Sam, for asking that question. I mean, so, for us, we've collected a registry of thousands of veterans that have been affected. And so we here at Burn Pits 360 will be reaching out to those individuals. We've put out a heat map as well, an interactive map, that if you select the map, it'll show you how many have registered through our registry and how many other people are sick where you live, right? Either sick or have died. And so it'll also not only tell the person affected, but it'll let members of Congress, like senators and congressmen, know that these are people that live in your state or district and they are sick and they have reported that they've been affected. So what they can do is, go to www.burnpits360.org under the Take Action tab, and they can download this one pager. They can call their members and ask them to support the bill, and also call members of the House Veteran Affairs Committee and the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee, and be sure to reach out and make sure that they're held accountable to provide that support for our warfighters.
And we will make sure we'll also put the web address for Burn Pits 360. We'll put that in the show notes as well for our audience, so they can click on there and then take it to the website. And again, I encourage, if there are any veterans out there, veterans who deployed to Iraq or Afghanistan, or maybe some other location where burn pits were used, I would encourage you to go to the Burn Pits 360 website and sign up for the registry. It's one way to make sure your voice continues to be heard. One of the questions I had, Rosie, for you is, and this is more about just the fact that standing up an organization like Burn Pits 360, because in our audience, we also have organizations or people who may be interested in getting involved in a particular issue. I was wondering if you could share, kind of any lessons that you and Leroy learned just from standing up Burn Pits 360, standing up a nonprofit, some lessons that you guys learned that may be helpful if there's other people out there that may be interested in doing something similar or be interested in supporting veterans in their communities.
Right. What I've learned, well, this is a passion-driven organization. We never, for people have different reasons for standing up nonprofits, but, for us, it's really just been, it's been an experience, a learning process for all of us, right? Because when you create something from passion, right, from something that's driven by personal experience, it's a whole different. It gives you a whole different outcome, right? So this for us has been a very unique experience in the sense of bringing together individuals affected by this issue that all bring a certain their own professionalism and their own experience and their own talent to the cause. And so, what we've learned is that as long as you don't forget what your why is at the end of the day, you'll have success, right? And you continue allowing that passion to drive the mission forward. But I think most importantly, what I've learned is that for me, as a caregiver, as a spouse, and even just as an individual, is that this has been therapy. This actually is my therapy, right? This is what has allowed me to cope with the losses, the trauma, those horrible experiences of what happens after war, right? The hardships. And that's tough because right now during COVID, especially, that I can't lean on the other spouses, that camaraderie that takes place between those families that come here, that really is weighing heavy because we can't, congregate or whatever here where we usually do and really lean on one another. But as an organization, I just have to say, if you're going to start a nonprofit, make sure that it's a passion-driven one. It's never really been about the money for us. But we realize later it takes money to operate. But I feel like if you're honest and true about your mission, then there's really no way that that can be destroyed by anything or anyone. I think at the end of the day, when you remind yourself that this is for you, it's for your family, it's for your loved one, and you do that with dignity and honor, that'll take you places that you just never imagined. So it's staying focused on really what is truly honorable and important. I hope that answers the question.
Rosie, I tell you, I could not have said it any better. I don't know if anyone could have said it any better. And no, that was very powerful. And I appreciate you sharing that with our audience. And for our audience, I just want you to know I've known Rosie here for the last year. And when she talks about passion and purpose, I don't think I know anyone who has more passion and more purpose in supporting veterans and their families and being an advocate for veterans and their families. Not only Rosie, but her husband, Leroy, as well. So I just want to thank you for what you guys are doing on behalf of veterans and their families, and especially those dealing with these heartbreaking stories of our veterans who are dealing with exposure to burn pits. As I told the audience in our introduction, unfortunately, there's the potential that history is going to repeat itself if we look at what happened to our Vietnam veterans and their exposure to Agent Orange. But it's because of people like you, Rosie, and Leroy and John Stewart, because of the work you guys are doing, you're helping making sure we don't repeat history and we do take care of our veterans and their families and make sure they get the care that they deserve. So I could not have said it any better. Thank you, Rosie. Thank you for joining us on the Service Before Self podcast. Sure.
And Sam, can I say one more thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, right. So I just want to let people know that we are going to be meeting again in Washington, and it's really our hope to mobilize. I know we're under this national pandemic, but whoever feels like they could join us in Washington, the plan right now is to meet there on November 11th on Veterans Day, and really get the word out, to get members of Congress, hold them accountable to support their constituency, and get these people out there on November 11th to make it known to America that it's our moral obligation to take care of the warfighters and their survivors. And that's really what November 11th is about. We'll provide more details, but definitely, reach out to, also, if you're a member of a veterans organization, is ask them what they're doing to support HR 8261 to make sure they're out there as well.
And we'll also help. We'll put some details in the show notes that will go along with this podcast, so our audience can see that as well, and hopefully they get out there and support. So Rosie, thanks again. Thank you, and thanks to Leroy for what you guys are doing for our veterans and their families.
Thank you, Sam, for having me.
Well, that brings us to the close of another Service Before Self podcast. Once again, I want to thank Rosie Torres, Executive Director for Burn Pits 360, for joining us today and sharing her story, her husband's story, and sharing the work that they're doing to support our veterans and their families. Please share this. I think Rosie has such an important story. Her and Leroy have such an important story. I encourage all of our audience out there to share this as much as possible. This is really important work. And as I said during the podcast and during the interview, we want to make sure that history doesn't repeat itself when it comes to how we support our veterans and our families returning from war. So once again, thanks to everyone for joining us today. As always, I encourage you to subscribe, to like us on whatever podcast platform that you're listening to this on. And please leave us a review. Please give us feedback as well. What you think of our podcast and how we can make it better is very important to us. So I encourage you to do that. So once again, thank you. And this is Colonel Sam Whitehurst signing off.
Thank you for listening to Service Before Self. If you are an individual or organization that wants to learn more about how you can assist veterans in your company or community, please visit our website at dixoncenter.org and follow us on social media at Dixon Center Vets.